Please allow me to introduce first the people here who are with us today. On my left, Michael Shellenberger. I'm going to talk much more about him in a minute, who is our guest today, very renowned American intellectual and journalist, who is going to speak to us today on the important issue on free speech. And Mr. Procaccini, who is my chairman, our chairman of ECR, and who is also so kind to come here to underline also the importance of free speech for our political group, the European Conservatives. Thank you also that you could come. So, dear Professor Shellenberger, because I forgot to mention that Mr. Shellenberger also is a university professor, and dear Mr. Procaccini, ladies and gentlemen, I am also saying hello to all these people who are watching us online, because this event is being streamed, and also to you that you found the time to come here and to show your interest and support for this cause of free speech. Contrary to what we are being made to believe, contrary to what we hope and deem right, I think that we are no longer living in a free society. True, the kind of society in which we live has democratic forms and procedures, elections and parliaments. All that is, of course, undeniable. Our institutions claim that they uphold our values, among which democracy, individual freedom and human rights are considered to be of paramount importance. And yet today we know that this is only one side of the coin, only partially true. We know, we feel and we see that the reality is very different and far more complex. Those among us who have read George Orwell's novel 1984 understand that the words we use can be perverted to mean the contrary. 1984 was intended as a warning, but it seems instead to have become the EU's operating manual. Nowadays, the Commission considers itself to be the Ministry of Truth. It claims to want to fight misinformation, disinformation and manipulation, but adopts such practices itself. We know that we have lost our freedom of speech offline and online. We have given up our academic freedom. We have seen science replaced by ideology. If we dare disagree, we are confronted with lawfare. In our universities, a snowflake generation of students hides in safe rooms. In our parliaments, laws have been adopted that seek to weaken our democracy. Maybe we have been too tolerant, too patient, too respectful for too long, even as they sought to impose their totalitarianism upon us. We did not see the danger when they promoted political correctness or the woke ideology. Maybe we were simply too kind when they imposed gender-sensitive language and started rewriting our books. We failed to stand up for the principles of objectivity and precision when it came to reforming penal law. We had forgotten about book burning in 1933 when they started burning books in Canada in 2021. Well, no, now all this is over. It must be over. Today we say enough is enough. The European Union has introduced a Digital Services Act that limits free speech. The European Union also introduces a shameful culture of denunciation into our societies. The Commission has now outsourced censorship to private companies. This is a modern and elegant way to let others do the dirty work. The European Union has introduced the notion of so-called trusted flaggers. Those are organizations or individuals tasked with defining what is true and acceptable, and to, if they so choose, subsequently denounce citizens for their opinions. Trusted flaggers are a clear and present danger to honest citizens, and doubly so as they will be empowered to act by the European Commission. I promise today we are going to fight the Digital Services Act, and before long we are going to take away the restrictions of free speech that are contained in it. The European Union wants to make so-called hate crimes an EU crime. Well, we are going to make sure It is those who try to limit our free speech who are identified as the EU criminals. Please note the difference. This is within our power, and we are going to succeed. Because we have woken up and we will fight for our rights. We won't tolerate censorship any longer. We have seen our once respected media turn themselves into tools of propaganda. They have already paid a heavy price for this. They have lost the confidence of the general public, and they are no longer the force power. We demand that the media must be once again fair, objective, and true. The woke revolution was a revolution of the political left. It was the final point of a political movement that has made its way into all our institutions. The left controls parliaments in many countries and has done so for many years. They lead our universities and determine what narratives are dominant in our media. We see today the results of this elite leftist revolution that seeks as much as possible to ignore democratic decisions it disapproves of. The election and re-election of President Trump can be seen as a bottom-up revenge of the silent majority against the top-down arrogance of the left. So we are going to misgender with biological precision. We shall joyfully spread information that the left doesn't like, and in doing so, we shall return political power to the people. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are waking up and we are going to resist. That we are still able to do so is no coincidence. In these years of darkness and growing danger to our freedom, there have been heroes who saw clearly what happened. They had the courage to stand up, to warn of coming evolutions, and to take personal risks for the sake of us all. Our guest today is one of these most outstanding and meritorious men. We welcome today Michael Shellenberger in the European Parliament. Michael Shellenberger is an American intellectual and journalist who has influenced us in many ways. His books are widely recognized and indeed of high importance. I personally remember how reading Apocalypse Never has changed my views on environmental questions for good. It immediately strikes the reader that contrary to many other authors, Michael Shellenberger knows and understands perfectly well his subject. When he writes about the use and the dangers of charcoal in Congo, he knows because he was there. Michael Shellenberger shares his knowledge and experience, not any abstract ideology. Indeed, his work is marked by realism. He suggests concrete and feasible solutions to many problems instead of spreading apocalyptic catastrophism and panic. In his approach, Mr. Shellenberger is technology and economy friendly. Hence, he advocates also for nuclear power, and he perfectly understands that we need it as a cornerstone of environmental policy. Many of you have also heard of him in the context of the Twitter files. Michael Shellenberger investigated and documented how Twitter censored opinions that were not shared by its political masters. He did this in cooperation with Elon Musk, by then the new owner of Twitter. Freedom of speech is, as you will hear, one of his main concerns today, and it is also in the context of our struggle for that perhaps most fundamental of all freedoms that we have the immense honor and pleasure to welcome him today in our European Parliament. He has kindly accepted to take also some questions after his speech. But before giving the floor to Mr. Shellenberger, I would like to address the co-chair of the European Conservatives in this Parliament, Mr. Procaccini, to address us on behalf of our political family. Please.
Good afternoon to everybody, first of all. And thank you to my colleague Fernand Kartheiser for hosting this relevant event. And welcome to Mr. Shellenberger. I listened with interest to the welcome remarks by my colleague Fernand, and I can tell this on behalf of the ECR. Freedom of speech is the cornerstone of democracy, so this is something that we must conserve. And so I think maybe this is one of the reasons why we exist. And so, obviously, is a complex matter. And the DSA, the Digital Service Act, is a complex matter. I will tell you something that maybe is not exactly on the same line of Ferdinand, because I was there during the last term, and I remember very well the works in the Commission and the point of origin and the point at the end of the travel. And so let me say that I fully agree on the importance of questioning the expanded powers given to the European Commission and the potential risks associated with the so-called trusted flaggers. The centralization of authority in the Commission raises concerns about bureaucratic overreach and political influence. This could slow innovation and disrupt the balance of power between the EU and the member states. Similarly, the trusted flagger system, which prioritizes certain entities in flagging illegal content, risks abuse if entities with commercial or political interests exploit their status. Without proper oversight, this system could lead to censorship, suppression of dissent, and ethical breaches. Together, these issues highlight the need for stronger checks and balance to prevent overreach and ensure the DSA achieves its objectives without compromising fairness or freedom. As ECR groups, we have always been at the forefront of such issues, and we will continue to defend freedom of speech against the imposition of the so-called single thinking culture. At the same time, it would be wrong to oversimplify the issue without considering all of its aspects. Our group, indeed, as I told you, worked tough during the approval phase of the regulation to try and improve a problematic text and managed to ensure the inclusion of a key aspect in the reform. Users who believe they have been victims of arbitrary removal of their content, or so-called shadow banning, can appeal to a national body dedicated to protecting their freedom of expression. This is an important point, because I remember very well during that time it was a shock. You, Fernand, before mentioned Twitter and the new owner of Twitter. But before Donald Tusk, there was someone else. And before Tusk acquired Twitter, I remember very well what was happening on that social platform and what daily happens in other social platform today. I remember, for example, that the president of the United States of America was banned, was completely banned by, in Twitter. At the same time, the Ayatollah Khamenei was free to write and say everything. This is crazy. This is something that I think we can't accept. And it's not easy to find a solution, but this is something that we have to achieve, because it was crazy. and it's important also to understand that the DSA introduces important new measures to combat the proliferation of illegal content such as child sexual abuse material, and imposes obligations on platforms to act swiftly to uphold fundamental rights. So there are always two sides of a coin, to a coin. Social media have given an equal voice to everyone, and it is absolutely crucial that we guarantee this fundamental right is respected and preserved. However, the internet, as usual, always brings risks. And as such, some time of harmonization in the set of rules that govern our activities online is needed, while the DSA is far from being a perfect instrument. We should try to improve the tool we have been given rather than deleting it entirely. The aim is easy, but it's not so easy to realize. What is legal in the external world has to be legal also online, and vice versa. This is an easy motto, but it's not easy to put in the reality. I hope the intervention by Mr. Shellenberger will help shed some light on how to do that, because honestly, maybe this is the most crucial battle of our age, and so we won't be fair, we won't be free, conservatives, but we understand very well that the challenge is crucial, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you also for recalling not only that you have a very nuanced approach, which is always very interesting and precious, actually, in all political fields, but that you have also recalled how much our political group, European Conservatives, have been active in trying to prevent the worst to happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the, I think, most important part of this afternoon. We have our guest, Michael Shellenberger. He has heard the introductory words by our president, and he is going to explain to us now how far the DSA can be a threat to the freedom of speech. Michael, it's up to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you very much, Member of European Parliament Kartheiser. It's been fantastic to get to know you the last couple of days. Thank you, Mr. Procaccini, for your wonderful remarks. It's a great pleasure to be here. We Americans care very much for Europe, not simply as tourists, though we certainly do enjoy that, but we do feel a continuing friendship and brotherhood with all of the European peoples, and we feel a continuing responsibility for what happens here, not just in terms of security, but in all manner. And even though you have seen our own politics shift more towards a national perspective, I think the majority of Americans want to maintain our strong bond, which has existed for nearly 80 years now. All of that being said, every relationship requires appropriate boundaries, and so I came here to say something very simple about free speech and the relationship between the DSA and the United States of America, and this is in particular directed at Ursula von der Leyen. And my message is in two words: back off. Back off your attacks on freedom of speech. Back off your attacks on the extraterritorial ambitions of the DSA, which are written right there in the statute. Now, you might think I'm being oversensitive on this matter. After all, Americans are very sensitive on issues of free speech. You may know that the founders of our country did not want a constitution. They didn't want a United States of America if we didn't have free speech enshrined as the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights to our Constitution. So yes, we are sensitive to this issue. And I think we have justification to be sensitive to it. The former head of the DSA enforcement, former Commissioner Thierry Breton, before Elon Musk did an interview with a presidential candidate by the name of Donald Trump, sent a letter warning Elon Musk that he might be in violation of European law. It's hard to describe how annoying we Americans found that letter to be. We don't care for foreigners telling us who we can and cannot speak with. And we don't care, and it's not an issue of Republican, Democrat. I myself am an independent. I didn't vote for a presidential candidate. I'm a working journalist. I have old-fashioned views of objectivity. But suffice it to say, on this issue in particular, every journalist should be a free speech activist in the world, and we did not take kindly to that assault on our First Amendment, that attempted assault. And you may remember that Elon Musk, who also was unhappy about this, posted a rather impolite meme, I think he even said himself. I won't repeat it in polite company, but needless to say, this rubbed us the wrong way, and we were happy to see Mr. Breton's early retirement from the commission after this incident. It gave us some hope. The problem of disinformation and misinformation and malinformation, it's a real problem. I've dedicated my life to combating misinformation. This is why I have 2 published books, each of which have 1,200 endnotes with references to the best available information. This is why I go on X and always start by repeating what the conventional wisdom is on a particular issue. And then I proceed to debunk it. I explain why it's wrong. It has never occurred to me to demand that the people that I criticize be censored. That is a completely foreign and bizarre idea to me. Life wouldn't be worth living if I didn't have people to disagree with. What would it be like to agree with everybody? It's a nightmare. You can watch a Black Mirror episode about that. You could read 1984, which apparently some members of the European Commission view not as a work of fiction, but as a handbook for implementing the DSA. Misinformation and disinformation and malinformation are serious problems. That's why we have freedom of speech. That's why we have journalism. That's why we allow people to argue. That's why we support discourse and debate. Censorship can never be a solution to misinformation. How could it be? You're simply allowing the misinformation to exist, and then you're hiding it, and then you're repressing the conversation about the topic at hand. Nobody knows more about any issue in the world than the issues that we have debate over, the issues that we have debates over facts on. Now, you have a fair objection. What about when people lie in order to steal your money? That's fraud. What about when people deliberately lie to destroy your reputation and ruin your career in life? That's defamation. What about when people exploit children, child exploitation? There's no disagreement that these cases are illegal, already illegal, should be illegal, should remain to be illegal, and every social media platform has a legal obligation and a moral obligation to fight these forms of freedom, these forms of speech. There's no disagreement about that. No additional laws are required to do that. The only question here is, are we going to allow a small committee of trusted flaggers, which, by the way, consist almost entirely of people in their 20s who are simply looking to see what the mainstream newspapers say is the truth, and then censoring on the basis of that? How has that worked out for us over the last several years? Let's just take a look. We were informed by every major government in the world and every mainstream news media organization that once you took the COVID vaccine, you would not be infected. You would not transmit the infection to anybody else once you had the vaccine. That was promised by every major government in the world, every major news media outlet. Was there ever a justification to make that claim? There was zero justification for that claim. They did not know that that would be the case. They had no basis for claiming it. Therefore, it was disinformation. And it was spread widely, and I didn't see anybody in the European Union demand that the people said that be censored or punished for saying it. What about where the COVID virus came from? We were informed that it came from a wet market in China. And when a US senator suggested that maybe it had something to do with the gain-of-function research that the US government had secretly moved to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Washington Post referred to that as a debunked conspiracy theory. Anybody that has access to this little tool known as Google search engine could have searched for virus leaking from a lab, and you would have discovered hundreds of articles around the world over the last decade about viruses leaking from labs. It turns out that it's quite common for viruses to leak from labs. The idea that that's a conspiracy theory is an example of what Freud and Jung would call psychological projection. The conspiracy theory might have been that it came from a wet market in China. The majority of US intelligence agencies at this point believe that that virus leaked from a lab, and we were proud to be the first news media organization to name the first 3 patient zero who got the coronavirus, and they were the people working to manipulate the coronavirus. That was mis or disinformation, depending on your point of view. Anthony Fauci knew exactly what the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing because it was him who skirted US law. After arguing that we should do gain-of-function research in the United States, he skirted the law and moved that research to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And now we're about to get the files to find out exactly what happened with that little piece of disinformation. What about the Hunter Biden laptop? This was, we were told that this was a Russian information operation by 51 former intelligence heads, including former heads of the CIA. That was proposed as the justification to censor a New York Post article little less than a month before the 2020 elections. We also discovered through the Twitter files that there was an active effort by the Aspen Institute on behalf of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to brainwash the mainstream media journalists through 2 separate workshops in the summer and fall of 2020, as well as to directly go to Facebook and Twitter and say that they had intelligence that there was a secret Russian plan to spread disinformation about Hunter Biden and Burisma involving an influence operation of the whole Biden family. That was the conspiracy theory that they persuaded the entire news media and social media of as well. The CIA approved that letter from the 51 intelligence agents. It was all disinformation. The laptop was in the hands of the FBI in December 2019. The FBI's Laura Demlow, the head of the Foreign Influence Task Force, admitted in her transcribed testimony to Congress that they knew that the laptop was in the hands of the FBI, and they knew within hours that the laptop was legitimate, and it showed exactly what it appeared to be on the laptop, which was a vast influence operation, influence peddling scheme of selling access to then Vice President Joe Biden through his son and his brother-in-law. That was a disinformation campaign that became the basis for demanding censorship. And so you might detect a pattern here. My objection is not simply to government censorship. My objection is to the weaponization of our intelligence and security agencies to make claims that they know to be false, to achieve a political agenda, and then to demand censorship on the basis of that disinformation. And now you might think, good thing that's all behind us. Good thing that no one's doing that anymore, except for the fact that you open up the newspaper today and you discover that the European Commission is accusing TikTok and the Russians of engaging in a disinformation effort to elect a right-wing Romanian as president. Simple question, where's the evidence of this? Has anybody produced the evidence? I'd like to see the papers on this. I'd like to see the evidence for it. We don't trust our intelligence and security agencies, and that itself is a national security threat. When you can't trust your own intelligence and security agencies to protect you and not engage in weaponization and not engage in politicization, you have a big problem as a civilization. And I don't trust them for very good reasons. We uncovered another disinformation and censorship operation earlier this year in late May, early June. Ursula von der Leyen herself involved in claiming that the right-wing politicians in Germany were accepting money from the Russian government, and that it was through a Voice of Europe website that really nobody had heard of. Everybody that claimed that they claimed had taken money denied it. The intelligence agencies of Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany all claimed that they had the information. Where was the information? Why couldn't we see it? Why have we still not seen it? Why has that story disappeared from the news media? Why did it only happen to come out a couple of weeks before the election as Europeans were deciding who they were going to vote for the European Parliament? They're openly engaged in the politicization and weaponization of our intelligence and security agencies every day in this building. They're doing this. And so it is my pleasure to denounce this weaponization here, just as I have in the US Congress, where we're about to open up the files of the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, all of which were politicized and weaponized against their political opponents. And I say this not as a right-wing populist or somebody, a Eurosceptic, actually quite liberal on very many issues, support the EU. I think it's a very efficient and beautiful peacemaking organization. But nonetheless, the people that created our liberal democracies fought and died for free speech. They fought and died so that the kings were not allowed to just arbitrarily murder the people in their countries. And you had a different history than we had. Your history was years and years, decades and decades, centuries and centuries of petitioning the king and asking for the right to be able to say certain things. Our country had a different founding. We said we want First Amendment at the top because free speech comes before democracy. So when we hear Ursula von der Leyen talk about how you have a democracy shield, to shield democracy from freedom of speech, to shield democracy from speech, that's right out of 1984. Democracy shield, Ministry of Truth. This is absurd that it's gotten as far as it's gotten. Now, I share your concern about the DSA. I think there's provisions in it around privacy. You know, the Europeans actually are much closer to me on privacy issues. Americans don't care enough about privacy. We experience the Europeans as not caring enough about free speech. There's certainly things in there that need to be rescued. But the idea of creating committees of so-called experts to decide what's true and false in advance, and then fine the social media platforms if they don't do what those bureaucrats say, should offend all of us as free citizens. That's the difference between being a slave or a serf and being a free citizen. It's that we have the right to speak our mind, and we constitute our governments, our leaders, on the basis of that speech. They don't give us the right to speak. We give them the right to govern. So the solution to freedom of speech is the solution to misinformation is more speech. It's not censorship. We have seen something happening around the world. Ostensibly, it's all a giant coincidence that Brazil and Canada and Ireland and the EU and the United States, they all at the same time came up with the same idea around 2016, that we needed to get in control of the social media platforms. It's also a magical coincidence that they all had the same plan to go and create government-funded NGOs, which, by the way, is a contradiction in term, government-funded organizations to decide what was true or false. That's your Ministry of Truth. That they were then going to go to the social media platforms and ask them to take down things until they got the legal power to punish them and fine them. This all clearly emerged as a plan that came out of the war on terror. These tactics were first developed in the Arab Spring and then in Eastern Europe. This is known as hybrid warfare. And then those tactics were turned against our people after 2016, after the populist revolutions of Brexit and the election of Trump. Clearly, decisions were made that certain people that felt that they ran the world felt that they had lost control of the social media platforms and they needed to regain that control. And I should hasten to say that independent political experts in the United States do not ascribe Trump's victory to social media. Most ascribe it to him defeating his Republican opponents in the primary and then defeating Hillary Clinton through the mainstream news media. But nonetheless, the sense was in the intelligence and security agencies that they had lost control of the ability to set the agendas, to define the frame of the debate, what we call the Overton window of the debate, and they needed to regain control of it. And we're all downstream from that decision almost 8 years later. That was made deep within the darkest, worst parts of our government, apparently, deciding that they needed to get control. And we've seen it everywhere. In Ireland, there was legislation that would have allowed the police to go into people's homes and read their telephones and their computers searching for misinformation and hate speech. I mean, it sounds like a Black Mirror episode. Why Ireland, by the way? What a funny coincidence. Why Ireland? It's a small country. Does it really matter? Is it a coincidence that Ireland is the headquarters of every major social media and internet company? Is that possibly one of the reasons that you could go into the homes of the executives of those companies and seize their phones and computers? Maybe. What about Brazil? Why do they have the exact same situation in Brazil? Trusted flaggers, government censorship, a slight difference in that this was all overseen in the judiciary branch rather than the executive branch, but it was the exact same setup for the censorship industrial complex. Are people so gullible? Are we really so gullible? You know, the idea here is that somebody says something wrong online and that everybody will suddenly believe it. Somebody says, the earth is flat, and then suddenly everybody believes it. Or as our Supreme Court Justice said during a recent hearing, she said, what if kids see people jumping out of buildings? Obviously, they'll all jump out of buildings because we all do exactly what we see online. I found this slightly humorous because it so happens that I love to follow accounts of people jumping out of buildings. It's known as parkour. You might have heard of it. It's a wonderful thing. I've never considered jumping out of buildings because I see people jumping out of buildings. In fact, I look at it and I go, I'm never going to jump out of a building. It turns out that there is a lot of social science on this question of how gullible are people. There's a book called by a Princeton scholar, Hugo Mercier, where he goes through all the research. And what he discovers, and this is lots of experiments in terms of how do you persuade people to change their mind. And what they find over and over again is that people are really stubborn. They're more stubborn than they are open-minded. You may be familiar with this as people involved in politics, how hard it is to change people's minds. It's very hard, right? It takes a huge amount of effort. In fact, you're always only getting a few percentage points, a few people to switch their votes. So it's very hard to change their minds. So this idea that everybody's so gullible or somebody sees something wrong, the whole point of social media is that you can reply. Now on X they have community notes, but you don't need community notes. You can reply. And you may know that on X, the kids call it being ratioed. When you've said something nobody likes, there's more replies than there are reposts. That's called being ratioed. That's the beauty of freedom of speech at work. Say something wrong or stupid on X, and you'll be ratioed. And maybe you'll turn out to be right, and time will tell. People thought Galileo and Copernicus were wrong. Turned out to be right. They would have been ratioed in their day. But nonetheless, we already have a built-in mechanism within free speech to correct misinformation. What about hate speech? There's all this hate speech online. Oh, it's terrible, all this hate speech online. And obviously it leads to real-world violence, right? Well, except does it? We did a comprehensive review of the literature on hate speech. I'm old enough to remember when violent video games were going to cause young men to go out there and beat people up. I remember violent movies were supposed to do that. None of the research ever panned out, showing any link between what people see on media and what they do offline. What about hatred in general? Can we remove hatred from the human heart? Is that possible? Can we get rid of hatred? Maybe if we repress it, if we hide hatred from people, there won't be hatred. This is an ancient emotion, hatred. It's evolved with us for a reason. The idea that hatred is something that needs to be censored is absurd. It needs to be countered. Ask Daryl Davis, African-American in the United States, himself has converted Ku Klux Klan members in the United States. Ku Klux Klan, those are our Nazis, our domestic-grown Nazis. Daryl Davis has done that, and he's the biggest advocate. I see you guys have me right here. I love it. Should I duck or? Are you not able to film? Okay. Oh, was that the whole speech like that? Wow. Ursula von der Leyen, what a message. He's the biggest advocate for freedom of speech. Why? Because you cannot counter hate through censorship. It's the same problem with misinformation. The only way you can counter hate is with love, and the only way you can express that love is if the hate is allowed to stand online and you can speak back to it. Now, we do carve out an exception to this. It's called the immediate incitement to violence, and it's a moment when speech turns into action. So you might say, I hate all the migrants in my country. I wish they would all go away. I wish they would all die. That's awful. It's terrible. It should be allowed so that you can talk back to it. You can address the hatred. When you say everybody should assemble in front of this hotel of migrants and then now burn it down, that clearly crosses the line. This is the line that most governments in the world have. Now, I will acknowledge that the European governments are going to draw that line a little bit closer to just incitement and not to the immediate side. So there's some differences here between the United States and Europe. But nonetheless, it's that immediacy, it's the ways in which the words would turn into an action. That's what we need to be concerned about and control. But just general expressions of hatred, that's every major civil rights movement in human history, every movement for human liberation, for racial minorities, for sexual minorities, has demanded free speech, had been denied freedom of speech, and in fact had to get freedom of speech first before they could make the case for their movements of liberation. There is no time in history when the good guys are the censors. 0 instances when the good guys are censors. Never happened. That's why the true champions of love and rights, like Daryl Davis, are the biggest advocates of freedom of speech. So where does that leave us? I think back to there's a beautiful Cambridge history of the printing press. We all know the Gutenberg movable type. It was an innovation with the kind of type, the metal type that they used, and they combined a set of technologies to get the Gutenberg printing press, which then allowed the Gutenberg Bible. The Catholic Church, they loved the printing press at first. The Catholic Church loved it. They could print the Bibles very cheaply and rapidly. And then this guy named Martin Luther got a hold of it and printed his famous denunciation of the indulgements that the Catholic Church would be selling to forgive people of sin. And then suddenly the printing press was being chased all over Europe. And the Dutch hid the printing press underground and they had to ship pamphlets all over. Twitter, before Elon Musk takeover, was the printing press when it was controlled by the Catholic Church. It was so tightly regulated. We got in there and we saw that there was actually something called a blacklist. Now, as a journalist, of course, we were thrilled because that's a great story, that there's actually blacklists in Twitter. But as a citizen, a free citizen that believes in free speech, we were horrified by this. On the list was Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, one of the world's great epidemiologists, professor at Stanford. He had authored the Great Barrington Declaration that was published in the fall of 2020, along with Martin Kulldorff of Harvard and Sunita Gupta of Cambridge. And it argued that we should protect the vulnerable from COVID, but we should allow the schools to remain open, the society to remain open. And he was on the Trends blacklist. Why? Did he spread misinformation? No, he countered misinformation. He was on the Trends blacklist because that's what Twitter, which was aligned with the US government, aligned with the public health establishment, they believed that simply having him on Twitter suggesting that the lockdowns were a bad idea constituted a form of misinformation. This, in a crisis like COVID, is the time that you most need freedom of speech. What we've seen around the world is governments increasingly using this crisis after that crisis to demand a crackdown. We can't figure out what to do in the face of a fast-changing problem like COVID without freedom of speech. And I'm happy to say that after we discovered that, obviously Elon Musk got him off the blacklist, invited him over to X, and now President-elect Donald Trump has nominated Jay Bhattacharya to be the head of our National Institute of Health, which is sweet justice and revenge on his mistreatment as a scholar. But I also think tells us something else, which is that so often the people throughout history that have been censored the most are precisely the people that had discovered a new truth and had the courage to tell a new truth. And I think we're going to discover that that same thing is happening here in the European Union, and it's precisely what we need to guard against. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Shellenberger has given, I think, a very, very important speech, and I have noted some sentences that should be very close to our hearts. And one is that the government cannot give us the right to speak, but we give them the right to govern. I think that was more or less a core message that you gave us, and that should be also our guideline. When the government, when the European Commission in our case is trying to censor, and we should say, well, we are giving you the right to act on our behalf, and censorship is totally excluded. And Professor Shellenberger has explained so well why that is the case, because it's only through free speech that we can really also take wise decisions, also in times of crisis or in difficulties. So, since Professor Shellenberger was so kind to offer us also question and answer possibility, I would like to ask you now whether there are any questions. Maybe, yes, Madam, you were the first who raised your hand, please.
Yes, hello, Christine Anderson from the ESN Group. First of all, thank you so much for being here, Michael. It was a pleasure listening to you, and you summed it up just perfectly. I mean, seriously. So I just, first, if I'm allowed, a quick comment. I really have to thank the American people that you guys actually did put Donald Trump back in the White House, because apparently that's what we need. And as far as I'm concerned, I would consider that our only hope at this point. And the point in case is, ever since he was elected, or right after he was elected, one of the members of the German government, you might call him, he's probably the best known moron we have in Germany right now. There is a story to that, but I won't get to that. So he actually is now pointing fingers at the United States, demanding censorship of social media, and pointing to the United States, saying if we don't do it, then we will get what they have in the United States now. So the wrong person, got elected. So they are painfully aware of the fact that they are losing control. And as you rightly pointed out, free speech is the only thing that will actually enable a democracy. Otherwise, you won't have a democracy. It will just fall apart. So they're acutely aware of the fact that they are losing control. And so I'm that's what I'm seeing anyway, is they will have to even, tighten the nuts even further, the bolts, to not lose their control. But by doing so, more people will wake up. And what we've seen in the last 4 years, especially this whole COVID madness, that's exactly what they did. They completely overplayed their hand, and a lot of people woke up. And one of the biggest benefits probably from this whole COVID madness was the whole transgender madness that is going on. Because for the first time, a lot of parents became aware of what their kids are being taught at school. So that didn't work out too well. But my question to you is, just 2 days ago, the Congress, they released the final report on their subcommittee of COVID. And this report reads entirely, I haven't read it all, it's 557 pages, something like that. But from what I read so far, it reads entirely different than from the report that we got from the COVID committee here in this house. In there, they repeat every single lie, all the narratives. So my question to you is, will you have a chance to really dig into that report and maybe, get something else to light that just with reading a summary we might have missed? That would be, I would greatly appreciate if you have resources to put to that.
Sure, and you made me think a couple of things that are worth unpacking. I mean, the first, because we were talking about it earlier, I did a Twitter files thread on the deplatforming of Donald Trump. And I should say we've done a lot of censorship stories over the last 2 years. And one of the things that you should be aware of that we keep seeing over and over again is that they hide a censorship initiative in cybersecurity. That was the first trick. And so the main censorship organization in the United States was called the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency of the Department of Homeland Security. The second trick they do is they will hide their censorship initiatives under protecting children, which is the most cynical. They're both cynical because we actually need more IT people. We need more cybersecurity. It's a place of chronic labor shortages. It's like one of the most important things that you can invest in. We also need more enforcement on the child protection side. So to engage in censorship is a double sin, because not only are you violating free speech rights, you're taking people that should be working on cybersecurity and child protection away from those fields and putting them into something sinister and illegal. But on the deplatforming of Trump, there's a few things I want to say about it. The first was, we discovered that the internal conversation in Twitter, because his tweets were being evaluated for whether or not he violated the terms of service, the rules of Twitter. And what we discovered is that the Twitter staff had evaluated them and decided that he had not violated the terms of service. So then why in the hell did they deplatform him? Why did they ban him? Because they had outside political pressure. So this idea that you're going to go get this neutral body of experts that's going to be completely impervious to politics, give me a break, you know? I mean, how often, by the way, I love my Apple, but nonetheless, how often do you get new terms of service all the time, right? You get them, and you read every word of it, right? I mean, every word of it, new terms of service come. So why don't I trust the European Union to censor us or to censor the internet? Because they say now, oh, no, it's not going to be a big deal. It's just going to be really just, you know, these things here. And then they're going to have a new terms of service. They're just going to update it quietly, and everyone's going to, you're going to gradually erode. And that's what you see in the social media platforms. Constantly, there are outside efforts to constantly lobby the companies to make the terms of service more censorial, giving them more powers to censor. Not that they needed it. I mean, what they were doing is they deplatformed Trump, invented a reason, and then modified the terms of service after that. Now, in terms of COVID, and I agree with you, by the way, I mean, it's refreshing when you sort of see them. Every time a right-wing populist is doing well, they say the social media companies need to be regulated. Every time a blob or mainstream candidate is doing well, then there's not a peep out of anybody. You know, the idea that only right-wing candidates are having, you know, bot efforts or troll farms or whatever, it's absurd. And not only that, but they haven't provided the evidence for it. But COVID was wonderful in the sense that it gave us a lot of insight into how coordinated these efforts were. We do have proof that the US and the British government were working together to censor on COVID. We also have proof that the United States government advised Brazil on its censorship. We also know that the George Soros-funded organizations have been funding censorship. In fact, I just spent not very long, like a half an hour looking at the Romania situation, and sure enough, we have a U.S. government-funded NGO, 2 U.S. government-funded NGOs that are behind these claims about the Romanian right-wing leader. So you still have U.S. government-funded entities engaged in election interference right now in Romania. And I'm not taking a side on it. I don't know. I'm not interested in that. But we want to see a fair playing field here. We don't want to see the foreign interference. This is a final thing I'll end on. Everything they accuse other people of doing, they're doing. They're engaged in foreign election interference. My government has been involved in foreign election interference. They need to knock it off. We need to set a better example for the world, and the European Union should do the same.
Thank you very much. For reasons of... Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I tried to go through it, but for reasons of geographical balance, I would take after Germany our Spanish colleague, Hermann Tertsch. Please, Hermann.
Thank you. I'm Hermann Tertsch from Vox, from the Spanish delegation of Patriots. So, first of all, congratulations for your fight, and the whole Brazil affair was very, very important for everybody, and to really raise the awareness of the threat also in whole Latin America and even America. I think we should be, we should be hopeful, because we are seeing the cracks in all the strategy. People start to be aware almost everywhere. They were not in 2016, neither in 2020 when they really went to work. But the thing is, if we see the Commission, the European Commission, censorship is essential for them in the fight, in the political fight they want to have now against the forces which are criticizing or which have an alternative to the policy which has obviously failed in the last 5 years, and they are attempting to continue and to pursue in this failure in this failure. And so as the resistance is rising, is every day bigger and growing without stop. We see it in Romania, but you see it in every election. In Austria, you will see it in Germany, you will see it almost everywhere. You see it in Spain as well. Von der Leyen and the commission they have done, they have created, will have censorship at the core. So how do you see this parallel development between United States and Europe? Europe, they will try to enforce and reinforce censorship, and having this kind of, let's say, political justice in the United States, where probably they will ask Fauci about what happened, and they will ask some very tough questions to the FBI and to the people responsible of what happened in the FBI and in the CIA and so on. It will be a two-track, very interesting development, no?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I should say, too, I mean, it's, I come from the radical left, not just the left. You know, I was sharing with you yesterday that when we were on the left in the 90s, we were disorganized. We had conflicting messages. Everybody was fighting all the time. And so these NGOs that we supposedly non-governmental organizations on the left demanding, fighting misinformation, they're so organized. I mean, I look at them and I go, this is weird. It looks like it's like a military operation. You know, and then you realize, well, they were doing this in the color revolutions, and many of these people were in intelligence agencies. We see huge dozens of top executives in the social media companies after 2016 went to go work or came from the intelligence agency. So we know that's going on. But in terms of the left-right thing, it's just worth a comment, which is that the left, at least in the United States, in 1964, the new left is founded on something called a free speech movement. That's what the left was. That's what it was when I was growing up. The left was defending the right to burn the American flag. It was defending free speech on sexual issues against the conservative Christian majority. So for me, I kind of think it will go down in history as one of the greatest political blunders of the 21st century, that the Democrats and the left have ceded the free speech position to the right. And if I were right-wing politicians, I would be jumping all over the free speech issue. Now, of course, it requires that you be consistent about it. It means you must defend the right of Hamas and other people that you hate to speak if you're going to be a free speech advocate. But nonetheless, it seems to me a catastrophic error to be on the wrong side of history on the speech issue, which the left has apparently decided to do. This is clearly an elite project at this point. It's just everywhere. I mean, the World Economic Forum came out last year, or no, I guess it was earlier this year, and they described misinformation as the #1 problem in the world. I mean, that's terrifying. So I think you've got a huge opportunity here. We are going to be able to get, I mean, I have high expectations of what we should be able to get out of the U.S. government. We're overdue for reform in the United States. In 1975, we had a Democrat senator named Church, appropriately, who did a huge hearings. They were called the Church Committee hearings. We discovered the CIA was spying on Americans involved in the peace movement. We discovered the CIA was involved in targeted assassinations. This is when we found out about CIA involvement in mind control and drugs and LSD and all these crazy activities. So that was 50 years ago. We're overdue for reform because, as I mentioned, it was Trump's own CIA director, Gina Haspel, who approved this disinformation from 51 former CIA and other intelligence directors, claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. So you have a level of corruption in our intelligence agencies that's very deep. And by the way, one of the best books ever written on social media was written by the former media analyst for the CIA, a beautiful person, by the way, Martin Gurry. It's called Revolt of the Public, if you're interested in this book. And so obviously the CIA produces very good people. His book argues that the social media is like the new printing press. That's much of his argument. But he points out two things. He says, you know, in the Cold War, the CIA would translate Pravda into English and send it to newspapers around the country. They weren't worried about stopping foreign influence. This idea that we're these vulnerable children that can't handle hearing from Russia today. I mean, it's called Russia Today. The idea that we're going to watch Russia Today and then suddenly be on the side of Putin, it's offensive to free-thinking people. You know, but I think that this is a huge opportunity, you know, for reform. You know, he also pointed out, by the way, that previous CIA directors, that when they retired, they would get out of politics. You're supposed to be boring. You're supposed to work at a boring think tank and be a boring person and be nonpartisan and apolitical. And that's all gone out the door. And we have a completely maniacal, politically activist former CIA directors, all of whom, by the way, sit on the board of the Atlantic Council, which is the NATO think tank, which has been one of the main centers of censorship in the EU.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add, Michael, I don't know whether you are aware of this, but from day one, practically, of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia Today and Sputnik have been forbidden, censored here in the European Union as being Russian propaganda. Actually, I think, well, that's my personal point of view, that I would like to listen to everybody and then to have an opinion. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, this gentleman with the glasses, please.
Thank you very much indeed, MEP Kartheiser and Mr. Shellenberger. It's Tony Gilland from MCC Brussels. We're a think tank here who are putting across a different perspective. And much of what I just want to say and two questions I want to ask you are very much informed by my colleague Norman Lewis, who's written a long report on the Digital Services Act, which I'd like to give to you later. And a key point that he makes is that actually the Digital Services Act is not about protecting people from speech, but about protecting the European Union and the European Commission from free speech, that they've become afraid of the contest of ideas in the run-up to the European parliamentary elections, when we had massive farmer protests and massive debate about migration. As you say, the internet's become the public square. The European elite are afraid of the ideas of people. They're afraid of free discussion. They're afraid of how it might work out in the vote. And I think that's a very key point. But two areas I'd like to ask you to speak a little bit more about. One is the role of AI in censorship. Only just for 3 months in 2021, YouTube pointed out that 6 million items of hate speech were taken down by AI. And that was nearly 20 times greater than anything else, trusted flaggers or NGOs or governments. 6 million items in just 3 months. Well, if you want to appeal against that, good luck, because you're not going to find that they've got the people there to hear your case. And indeed, why should you? So the role of AI in taking down people's arguments and points in the public square, I think, is really key. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And then finally, sorry, the other question, if I may, is on self-censorship. Because you've spoken rightly about the importance of these hate speech laws and crimes, etc. But increasingly, if you go to universities, if you talk to young people or in the workplace, people are terrified to have a discussion about anything because of hate speech.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So is the censorship that they're demanding rational by their own goals? Will it help them to achieve their own goals? There's an argument that yes, because they can control all the social media platforms, then you get to this big brother world and you get this full totalitarian control. You know, the argument against it is that governments have tried censorship for a very long time and it hasn't worked out for them. And the biggest thing going against censorship is the Streisand effect, which is this effect that when you hear of censorship of something, you want to go read it because that's the most interesting thing. If something got censored, that's very interesting. My first book became a bestseller because I was censored by Facebook. Thank you for the censorship. It was actually named for that because Barbara Streisand tried to prevent her photo of her home from being on the internet, and like 2 people had seen it, and then she filed the lawsuit, and then like 2 million people saw it. So it's called the Streisand effect. So is it rational? Is it irrational? I mean, you can't help but see a kind of, again, a projection from the European, that they are so scared that they can't defend their own views, that they sort of imagine that everybody else can't defend their views either. They can't stand to see Russia Today because they're not, because people wouldn't be prepared to possibly argue against it. That's a sign of insecurity, not a sign of confidence. A confident person wants to have a debate. Just to give you a sense of it, we have emailed, at this point, I think it's 300 people involved in the censorship industrial complex, and not one of them has agreed to even respond to our questions, much less to have a debate. That's how you know these are not true left-wing activist organizations. Left-wing activist organizations love talking to journalists. That's what they're all about, is getting publicity. These are groups that want to work behind the scenes with governments, with the intelligence agencies to pressure the social media platforms to censor what they don't like. On the AI, your alarm, I think, is well justified. I just think the only caveat I would make, because AI is what allows the mass censorship. The only caveat I would make is that obviously they're programming the AI for certain things. So humans are still making those decisions about what gets censored. So you do need to continue to put the pressure, because obviously the AI could work for free speech. Or maybe not obviously, but you could have, AI that worked for free speech, allowing free speech and protecting against unnecessary takedowns. So that's the concern of it, is that YouTube is run by real people who are subject to our laws. My view, by the way, we have something called Section 230 in the United States. I don't know if there's something similar here, but we classify legally. We give much greater legal liability protections to platforms, social media platforms, than we do to publishers. And so I think if you're going to have these special liability protections, then you should allow adult users to decide on their own legal content on their sites. That should be a requirement to have that. Otherwise, you should be a publisher and subject to normal liability protections. In terms of self-censorship, yes. I mean, we saw cancel culture happening, right? We saw students demanding that certain speakers not be allowed to speak on campus. That was going on for a full decade before we got to the emergence of the censorship industrial complex. So there's a part of the censorship that we're seeing, which is coming from the top down, from Ursula von der Leyen, from Biden administration, from all these folks in the governments. But then you also see this grassroots demand for it. In fact, you sort of see people in the censorship industrial complex who are kind of that type of person. And I'm not going to try to be, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If you want to censor somebody, if you want to censor legal speech, there's something wrong with you. Like psychologically, there's something wrong with you. You're not a full human. There's something missing. They study this. It's called the third person effect. What's the most amazing thing, when you talk to somebody that wants to censor somebody, and you say to them, okay, we're going to censor. So what have you said that you would like to see censored? What have you said that you wish the government had censored? They can't come up with a single thing. They're completely blind. So there's a combination of insecurity and overconfidence. I think we're all familiar with this type of person. The kind of person where they don't like something you do and they go tell the teacher on you. You remember that in school, or they go, they can't just talk to you like honest, like a human being. They don't have the confidence to do that. So there's something wrong with these people. It's a psychopathology to want to silence people in a democracy. So I think that's all been fed by social media, which creates, on the one hand, the fishbowl effect, where everyone's so anxious and scared. Oh my God, somebody says something mean about me on social media. I was just in Australia, and the Prime Minister of Australia gets up there and he goes, somebody took my head and put it on a different cartoon body and made a meme about it. He goes, that's the kind of thing that this law will prevent. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what's the matter? You're in politics. Like, what's going on here, right? So there's just a general thin-skinnedness of some people that they're so intolerant, which means they're so overconfident in their views, but they're also too insecure to defend them. And I think it's important to be aware of that, because it means that this conversation is so important to have this. The free speech people will win if we can drag this effort into the light and shine sunshine on it. It will lose if they just continue to operate behind the scenes.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm not going to have a third-person effect, but a three-person effect, because we have to think also of concluding at some moment, and you are all invited to a cocktail reception after this interesting speech and the question and answer session. But I have several people, many actually, who have asked for the floor, so I would arbitrarily ask the lady first to speak. Please be brief, because we have time limits also, and then we take 2 other people also from that side of the room. Please, madam.
I will make it short. Thank you. My name is Mette Frobenius, and I'm an independent journalist working in Denmark. And you've talked about Elon Musk and Twitter as though now it's good because it's owned by Elon Musk and then everything is fine. Another way of looking at that could be Twitter is just owned by somebody else now who does it his way, and in the future when Twitter is sold to another one, it's going to be run in another way. Could you please make a comment on the fact whenever the social media or the media platforms are owned by people that are very close to the political power? Some of us in here remember still when Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian member of the parliament, were here, and he owned his own media stations throughout Europe, so he had easier access to the media. And also talk about the gray zone between the journalists and editors and the politicians, because sometimes you see journalists and editors are getting a job. Like now we've seen that President Trump has taken a former Fox TV host and made him minister. So do you consider it a gray zone between politicians who have the power and the journalists who should be independent, fighting the power or challenging the power? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry about it. I mean, obviously these social media platforms are very powerful. We knew the media was the main event when it came to politics. I mean, how the media covers things, the agenda setting, deciding who's legitimate, who's not. So I've done a white paper policy proposal where I'm arguing that if you are a social media platform, then you should allow adult users to choose their own legal content. Now, you do have that on X. You may know that on X you have 2 different channels. One is the people you're following, and then there's something called For You, which is what Elon wants you to see. So there is some transparency there. It's not great. I would still, because of course you're right. I mean, like, even if Elon's doing a good job, and I'm not even saying that he is, I'm just saying that it's much freer than it was, you know, you still have a huge amount of power concentrated in the hands of a small number of people. I mean, I posted something on TikTok where literally all I said was that there's only 2 sexes and you can't change them. That was like all I did, and it was banned. I mean, it was blocked from Twitter. You know, it was like, I mean, like, there's like not a scientific debate about that, but that was actually blocked from TikTok. So yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken. I would support, you know, if you want to have legislation that would allow this, you know, free and open internet, I would support it. The issue of the revolving door, you know, it's a huge problem. I'm not sure how to solve it. I mean, there's some people that propose like 5 years, you know, in between these things. It doesn't sound bad. I mean, 5 years even from being in government and then going working for a pharmaceutical company is one of the ideas as well. So, but yeah, we definitely see, I mean, like I said, it was very disturbing to see how many people came from the intelligence community to then go work at the highest levels of Facebook and Twitter. There was something going on there that I didn't think was right.
Thank you. The gentleman in the blue suit.
Hello, my name is Herman Kelly. I'm president of the Irish Freedom Party. We raised the issue of free speech a lot in well-attended rallies in Ireland from the very beginning, where the Irish government tried to introduce what they called anti-hate speech, a bill. Now, if you look at Article 2 of the bill, which is initially introduced, it actually makes reference in Article 2 to this EU Council decision of 2008. So it actually comes directly, and it says so, directly from the European Union itself. One thing is, it doesn't define what hate speech is, probably because hate speech is something that the government hates. And also, when you're arguing with the left, would a good argument be that where before we have we have equality of all citizens before the law, and this bill would actually introduce a hierarchy or a hierarchy of protections according to identity groups, which is chosen by the government. But anyway, we'll get down to, so we can see that the consequences of this hate speech bill in Ireland, which has been curbed because they got a bit afraid there in the last year because there was quite a political kickback against it. But in regards, let me see, the bill itself, is there anything that, are Americans very interested in what is going on in Ireland? Because, as you mentioned, many of these social media companies are headquartered in Ireland, and their data centres are in Ireland, and so the law, which comes from the EU, is enacted in Ireland across the whole of the European Union. Is that a matter of big interest in America?
So they've all made this, like Australia, Brazil, Ireland, European Union, they all have extraterritorial ambitions, like in the legislation, which is crazy. You know, you would think you would sneak that in later, but for them to lead with that, of course, has given us an opening to protest it as Americans. I mean, you may remember that there was a violent video that the Australian government wanted X to remove from the platform worldwide. That went to court, and the Australian court blessedly ruled on the side of free speech in that case. But certainly, I think when you, again, Americans are so sensitive to it, so we're a bit, you know, when we sort of see out foreigners trying to interfere with our free speech rights, we get very upset about it. And that's why I am suspicious that there is some coordinating effort around, you know, probably by our intelligence and security agencies, because that's who you see involved in this, to work in these different countries to have a similar sort of censorship apparatus, so that the idea is that, you know, once the EU, Brazil, Canada, you know, Ireland are all censoring this particular way, I think their idea was, well, then Meta and X and TikTok and the others will just go ahead and do that for the whole world. So that you actually end up getting censorship through the back door without violating the First Amendment. In terms of what works with the left, I wish I could say that we had been more successful with it. You know, what I will say in terms of the political opportunity for your side of the issue is that there are still enough liberals, the older guys, the Gen Xers, that never stop being in favor of free speech. In the United States, if you look at the Democrats, if you ask the question, should the government be involved in fighting misinformation on social media platforms, support for that rose among Democrats from 40% in 2018 to 70% in 2023, which is just so sad and sobering. On the other hand, there's still 30% of Democrats that are for free speech. So if you have all Republicans and then 30% of Democrats, you have a winning issue. I mean, look, I used to make the case for nuclear power, and I'll tell you something, free speech is a lot more popular than nuclear power among the left. So, and it's notable that our opponents on the left, they don't really want to debate this, right? They just want to try to regulate it quietly. Obama gave a speech that was basically prelude to the introduction of a disinformation governance board at the Department of Homeland Security in April of 2022. He gave a speech in Stanford sort of making the case for it. The disinformation governance board was just widely rejected in the United States. They announced it, and then they sort of said that we didn't really mean to do that, and then they just shut it down, and the person that is associated with it had her career ruined, justly so. But nonetheless, we have persistently pestered Obama with questions. His spokesperson got back to me with a kind of mealy-mouthed thing, but Obama has not wanted to be associated with that censorship effort anymore, which I think is a sign. Somebody that's very concerned about his legacy does not want to be associated with censorship. So I think I would say that we're still on the right side of history. I think the arc is moving towards us. Things are going to change in the United States in a positive direction, but obviously I'm here because I'm worried about what Europe could still do.
I have to apologize to you. I'm just going to take one more question, and then we can continue maybe our discussion outside, because we have still a cocktail reception that would allow us to continue our exchanges if Professor Shellenberger accepts, of course. Of course. But we are a little bit under time constraints also concerning this room. So I would take one more question, and please continue the discussion after we have finished this part of that. I think the lady here has been...
If I can speak French, because I heard the translation.
We try to translate. French? I think translation is it in both ways? We have a translation into French. Yes. I don't know. Do we have a translation from French?
Okay. Merci beaucoup d'avoir organisé ce sujet. Il tombe à pic et je vous remercie d'être là parce que hier j'étais dans l'audition de TikTok.
I have to translate, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. No problem. I can try to speak English, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Virginie Joran from France, and I worked a lot on the DSA. I'm also in a new group to follow this DSA and the implementation. But yesterday we have this nice audition because, as you know, since the election in Romania, they didn't like the results. And yesterday we have an audition, and they imposed to TikTok to come here and to explain why Romania get these results. It was very interesting because nobody's mentions that maybe the people doesn't want DSA and want another president and another way that the EU imposed. And it's very important that you erase because it's true. DSA is a tool to against us. And I saw that during the audition, during the works about DSA. And the good things, it's since all this year, all about the results of election, we are resisting about this. And thank you to be there because you are like an oxygen for them to continue the fight because they are very afraid about that. They use DSA against them, but at the end, the people doesn't follow that. And I hope now to continue this work even with you because we need you, because in January you have a new government, you have a new strategy about freedom of speech, and they are afraid about that also. And that's the reason for me it's very important to follow this topic. Also, I work with Christine Anderson, she's here, about COVID crisis. All the different version was about this pandemic. We saw that inside this parliament. And also they continue this narrative and they continue to impose this strategy. And for me, it's and also for my group, because freedom, it's the best value of the world, and we have to fight this. And thank you again to be there. And I hope to continue the cooperation because you are like, I repeat again, an oxygen, and thank you again for that.
So, I think that were very important words, and I think very, very correct. Actually, yes, we had today fresh air with Michael Shellenberger, and not only fresh air, but also a source of inspiration, somebody who comforts us in our situation, and he really wants to give us also the force to continue our fight. And I think that what is happening in the United States for the time being, and also during the next months, probably will show us, like in a mirror, what is happening in other places, and it will help us to be perhaps more critical with ourselves. Have we Europeans, have we in the European Parliament done enough really to fight against censorship, or have we become lazy? Have we been too relaxed about seeing how our freedom is being put into question? There are a number of very interesting notions also, Michael, that you used in your speech, like the complex, the censorship industrial complex, which is a notion that we do not use here in Europe, but we should reflect upon this. We should analyze how it works and dismantle the mechanisms behind what happens. Not only be critical, but really see how it works and then attack those, of course, with very civilized means, who are behind this. I think you mentioned secret services. These are, of course, powerful organizations, big political parties. And we have, I think, we have a lot of work to do in Europe in order, first of all, to reach the level of analysis that you have shown us today and the level of resolve to fight against this. So, thank you very much, Professor Shellenberger. As you mentioned, it was fresh air in the European Parliament, a source of inspiration. And we thank you, Mr. Shellenberger, for the time that you have spent with us today and for the helping hand that you have reached to us Europeans in the spirit of solidarity that you described in the beginning of your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.